Oh howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. I wanted to continue a series today on popular endgame unique items, and today I wanted to take a look at Progenesis. Those of you that voted in the poll that I ran on the YouTube channel a little while ago, don't worry, the winner of that poll is coming soon, as will multiple of the runners-ups. But I chose to mix up the order a little bit because I didn't want to have a whole clump of really easy to get items together, Incandescent Heart, which we had last, the Taming, which we're going to do next, and I wanted to mix them up and put Progenesis in between. Progenesis is an expensive item. This is arguably the best flask in the game. It's not something that fits on every single build that's ever been made, and of course, because its benefits are entirely defensive, some people just aren't interested in that in the softcore world. But it is incredibly strong on the builds where it truly shines. It is the most used flask in patch 3.24 on level 100 characters, but it also remains the most used unique flask on level 100 characters that have a Mageblood equipped. Mageblood really changes the way that you value your flasks, and that I think is something that really speaks to the power of Progenesis. If you're only willing to use one unique flask, it's often Progenesis. Now, Progenesis has 3 lines of text on it. The first 2 dictate its duration and its number of charges per use. Of these, the duration one has a wider roll range. So the duration can roll from 65% base duration to 135% base duration, and depending upon where in that range you roll, it will either say increased or decreased, or the line will be entirely blank if you go right in the middle. This is the more important of these 2 lines because the reduced charges per use cannot change the number of uses that you get out of a full Progenesis. You always get 2 uses when it's fully charged, no matter what the roll is within that range of 20 to 10% reduced charges per use. Additionally, of course, Progenesis is an Amethyst flask. It gives you 35% chaos resist. It's easy to forget that that's there, but it's all upside that it is, even though most people who are wealthy enough to afford a Progenesis can probably afford to max out their chaos resistance with their flasks down. But if you're in a situation where you've got the choice between investing in, say, critical strike multiplier or a little bit of chaos resistance, then you might decide to go with the critical strike multiplier and rely upon Progenesis to cap out your chaos resistance for you. Okay, so let's talk about the reason though that people actually equip Progenesis, and that is this line of text. When hit during flask effect, 25% of life loss from damage taken occurs over 4 seconds instead. Note that the wording on this is very precise. It is only about life lost as a result of damage. So if you're losing mana as a result of damage because you've got mind over matter allocated, or if you're losing energy shield as a result of damage because you've got energy shield and the damage you're taking does not bypass it, then in that case, Progenesis isn't going to do anything for that damage. So definitely leave this flask at home when you're planning a chaos inoculation build. What this effectively allows you to do is borrow health from the future to survive hits that you couldn't survive right now. Let's say that you've got 6,000 life on your character, and let's just pretend your energy shield is 0 and that you're not using mind over matter. You've just got that 6,000 life and then you go splat. If you hit for 7,000 damage, you're dead. But if you hit for 7,000 damage and Progenesis is up, then 5,250 of that is taken away immediately as life, and you fall to 750. The remaining 1,750 is borrowed from the future. You have to pay it back over 4 seconds, but you're not required to pay any interest on it. As long as you can recover life quickly enough, you'll survive that drain of health. There are several ways that you can recover this life. One very effective one is the Recoup mechanic. Let's quickly go through that. There are several things on the passive tree, as well as some items we'll come to in a sec. Infused Flesh, 18% of damage taken recouped as life, and there's some small nodes that give you more of the same near it. There is Vampirism, 12% of damage taken recouped as life. There is Circle of Life, 12% of damage taken recouped as life. Again, Vampirism and Circle of Life have more of the same stat available on their small nodes. Then on equipment, there is Stasis Prison if you want to take Recoup up to the moon, but you can also get rings that have smaller amounts of this stat, but that will still be enough for Progenesis to work really well. If you've got at least 25% life recoup, then this recoup will pay all of the health you're borrowing from the future back with Progenesis. So let's say that you take that 7,000 damage and you've got 30% recoup this time. Now you take 5,250 immediately and you owe 1,750 to Progenesis, payable over 4 seconds. Your recoup then kicks in and you gain 2,100 health spread over 4 seconds, 30% of the 7,000 damage that you took. That repays the 1,750 you owe, plus a bonus 350 that goes to topping up your life pool. And of course, that's only 30% recoup. You can get a lot more than 30% if you really want to go all in on this. The other thing that can potentially bail you out of this massive health debt to future you that you can accrue here is Life Leech. Life Leech is much worse at doing this than Recoup is, but if you can't spec enough Recoup, then Life Leech might be your best option. What happens with Life Leech is that, again, taking the example of 6,000 life and you take 7,000 damage, you drop 5,250 life and you're at 750. Now, before you fall to 0, you need to hit a monster. As long as you can do that, you're going to very quickly start out-leeching this drain of health that's on you at the moment from Progenesis, and that means that Life Leech is then going to repay that debt to future you. You might find yourself on a position where you're back to full life, and as a result your leeches fall off unless you're a Slayer. In that situation, you still have to repay any Progenesis debt that you owe, but you're also out of trouble right now. And that's the reason that Leech can work with Progenesis, but it's a little bit less reliable, especially if you're taking repeated very big hits. If you're taking repeated very big hits, then what you want is to be recouping some of that life, and ideally more than 25% of it. One more thing that Progenesis is really, really good in conjunction with is Petrified Blood. One general rule in PathOfExile is that if something is good, then doing the same thing twice is even better, and Petrified Blood and Progenesis is no exception. Petrified Blood also allows you to borrow health from the future in order to endure an otherwise fatal blow right now. They do so in slightly different ways, and the two of them stack together multiplicatively rather than additively. This is the weaker of the two ways they could stack, but they're still very strong together, and in fact, if you look at level 100 characters that use Petrified Blood, disproportionately many of them use Progenesis as well. So where does this item come from? It drops from the Uber Maven. Now the interesting thing is that in patch 3.24 it was made much more common. It's still the most valuable flask in the game, but its drop rate went from something like 1.5% in 3.23 and earlier, up to something more like 10, 11 or 12% in patch 3.24. What's interesting to note is that the access tokens for the Uber Maven are now pretty much tied to the price of Progenesis throughout a league. The more valuable that Progenesis is, the more it's going to cost you to run the Uber Maven. The more that Progenesis starts to fall in price, especially towards the end of a league, the cheaper that the Uber Maven access tokens become. Anyways, this is arguably one of the best flasks in the game. It's something that goes on a lot of builds, and it's something that has incredibly strong synergies with Petrified Blood, but that is strong enough to stand on its own. The next video in this series is going to be looking at something that is much more easily outclassed by rare items, but that is also much more accessible, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, may your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.